warm welcome to everyone. We would like to wish everyone a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Samantha from Safeopedia, and here at Safeopedia, our mission is to support the EHS professionals, operational folks, and any safety-minded individuals with free safety information, tools, and education. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to those dedicated professionals for the great work they do on a daily basis. Just a reminder, the webinar is being recorded and we will send out a link to the recording to everyone in a few days. This webinar is for you, so let's keep it interactive. Make sure you get your questions into the GoToWebinar console and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. Today, we're proud to present on 420 gas detection solutions for the cannabis industry. This Safeopedia webinar has been made possible by GFG, a preferred manufacturer member of 80 Safety Network. 80, together we win. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter, Bob Henderson. Bob is the president of GFG Instrumentation, Inc., a leading supplier of portable and fixed gas detection and indoor air quality monitoring products. He has over 38 years of experience in design, marketing, and manufacturing of gas detection instruments. He was one of the original team who helped to start Biosystems back in 1982, where he was director of marketing. Later, he went on to become Vice President of Marketing at RAE Systems, and later yet, Vice President of Business Development at BW Technologies. For the last 14 years, he has been President of GFG Instrumentation, Inc. in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm very excited to have you all sit back, relax, and enjoy the presentation. With that, Bob, please take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Samantha, and thank you all for tuning in. Happy 420 to you. I've got to mention that my expertise and background is measuring stuff once it's present in the air. So my expertise is not so much on the consuming side, although I did come out of the 1960s and I vaguely remember that decade growing up in California. But I actually did not realize the significance of the date. I knew all about Pi Day 3.14, and I knew about May the 4th, as in be with you, but I did not know about the significance of 420. So when I tried to schedule the seminar on Friday instead of Tuesday, I was informed by my good friends at SMG and Safeopedia and our own director of marketing, no, I think, Bob, you want to stick with 420. So here we go. Now, for those who don't know much about GFG, we specialize in gas detection equipment, fixed and portable. We're a worldwide company. Any of the pictures of our own gear that I've included in this presentation are really for the purposes of illustration only. I'm trying to really be strictly factual in terms of applications, which types of equipment to select, the obligations for gas detection and monitoring. So I'll try to be walk the straight and narrow on that one. Now we've got a really diverse group of people who are signed in at the moment for the webinar. We have a lot of people who I believe are actually in the cannabis industry in one way or another. We have a lot of distributor salespeople. We have some hygienists and municipal people who are involved in the licensing process, and I see that we have some fire service professionals in the audience also. So I'm going to try to keep the information equally applicable to everybody in the group. And if I slip and miss out the answer to a question from your perspective, send me an email and I will try to answer all of those questions with a little time. Safeopedia is very good at helping to maintain contact with everybody post-webinar. So if you just send in that email, we will do our best to answer the question. So especially if you have an outsider, if you're the manager or the owner or actually working out of or seeking the license for a cannabis enterprise, you may need some help from outsiders once in a while for some specialized knowledge. One of the big issues is how much can you share? On both sides of the table, if you're talking to a manufacturer or a salesman from a distributor, they need to be mindful that there are some confidentiality issues. But on your side of the table, if it's your facility, to get the best result, you do need to share the pertinent information. But a lot of this is for of this material in the next hour from that perspective is to help you make a self-assessment and increase your understanding of what might go wrong, what might need to be measured, what some of the legal obligations involving gas detection might be, and to come up with a road forward. So make sure that everybody is on the same page. Are the issues mostly related to safety? Is it facilities and process management? Is it an explicit licensing requirement? And you'll find that manufacturers and distributors in this area, in this business area, are pretty good at maintaining confidentiality and pretty knowledgeable with regards to the issues. So the primary concern for the manufacturer and the distributor is, of course, what can we do to help the end user customer meet their needs, meet those needs better with less stress, less cost, and come up with an optimal way of dealing with some of these gas detection issues. The gas detection obligations are definitely not limited to portable instruments. In fact, the strictest gas detection cannabis industry requirements are for fixed carbon dioxide and fixed LEL, that's lower explosive limit, combustible gas measurement. And we'll be talking quite a bit about that. So one of the questions, one of the initial questions would be, well, do I really need to invest, or is there a requirement for a fixed system, or can I just use a portable instrument to periodically go out and take some readings? What do I need to measure? What do the regulations say? Well, it depends on the nature of your business. For growers, typically, you're going to be enriching the atmosphere within the greenhouse by adding a little carbon dioxide. And if you're doing that, then there is generally a very firm obligation that you must have a fixed gas detection system for CO2 measurement active 24 hours a day with relays. If you hit an alarm condition, with relays that will trip the alarms, turn on additional ventilation, sound and evacuation alarm. But you need to have a system that is up and running all the time. You can't just periodically wander through the greenhouse and take a look at what's going on with a portable instrument. Another issue is odor control. Excuse me. I've thankfully I've had my second shot 3 weeks ago now, but that COVID shot was no good at all with regards to the pollen that is bothering me at the moment. Here in Michigan, it may be, I'm looking out the window, it may be snowing today, but there is a lot of pollen in the air, so I'll ask forgiveness in advance for coughing once in a while in the next hour. Anyway, for growers, a primary obligation is CO2. Another obligation is often looking at the terpenes, the compounds in plants that produce essential oils and odors and tastes and aromas. In high concentrations, they can actually be toxic for workers, and in lower concentrations, the people in nearby neighborhoods may become aware that something is going on, and frequently you want to install scrubbing systems for the ventilation in the greenhouse to keep those odors contained. And if you have a breakthrough, you're going to want to have a gas detector that can measure the terpenes on the outside downstream from the scrubber to let you know if something is going wrong or you need to replace the filters. You also do need probably a survey monitor. Certainly, if you don't own a survey monitor to begin with, when you're thinking about where to position the sensors for your fixed system, or what kind of background concentrations exist in the grow op, well, you'll need a portable instrument to do that. Extraction involves the use of combustible gases like propane, or it can, such as propane and butane, solvents such as ethanol, methanol, benzene, hexane, and other gases and materials such as supercritical carbon dioxide, in order to separate the non-saleable parts of the cannabis plant from the saleable part of the cannabis plant and the products that are actually going on to ultimately the dispensary shelf. So for extractors in the areas where you're actually using the combustible gases or the flammable solvents, those are Class 1 Div 1 hazardous locations because of the presence of combustible gas and vapors, and you must monitor those areas continuously with an explosive gas detector, an LEL gas detector. Now, if you're using supercritical CO2 in that same area, then you also need to monitor the CO2 in the extraction area. And if you're using a lot of solvents and you have the presence of solvent in the atmosphere, you may also need a ppm level measurement using a photoionization detector to measure the solvent vapors in the air. So the extraction room is definitely an area where you are going to have a fixed system in place. The question is really only how many fixed system sensors and what types of hazards are you going to measure? Is it LEL only, or do you have some of the other hazards also? The rooms that are immediately adjacent to the extraction room are also hazardous locations. They are Class 1 Div 2 hazardous locations. The big difference there is not really in what you need to do in terms of monitoring. The issue there is that in Class 1 Div 2, the certifications of the instruments that are installed in the area, in the sensors and the detectors installed in the areas, the requirements for certification are a little bit more lenient than in the Class 1 Div 1 area, but you have the same obligations for monitoring. Now, if you're on the inspection side of the fence, you're going to be relying on a portable detector. Guys, a 4-gas meter is not going to cut it. For inspection of cannabis facilities, you most definitely on the grower side need to include a carbon dioxide sensor. Probably you'd be better off including a PID as well for terpene and solvent measurement, as well as an LEL sensor for combustible gas measurement. And then carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide are just so pervasively common out there that I usually include a CO or a dual channel CO hydrogen sulfide sensor in the instrument without really thinking about it too hard. Emergency responders, you need the same combination. Emergency responders are in the unenviable position of not really knowing what's going on. People may be hiding what's going on. People may have limited knowledge of the hazards, and all of these ingredients go together, often, sadly, into a cannabis lab explosion. It's kind of interesting how there is a relationship between legalization of recreational cannabis and a proliferation of hobbyists and guys who are making it theoretically for their own personal consumption. You know, you can get an extraction, a butane extraction system, buy everything you need over the internet for a couple $1,000. And in a lot of jurisdictions, it's legal to do that if you're not selling it, even without a license. Well, you may not be selling it and you may not need a license, but you still have the hazards. And unfortunately, that has led over the last few years to quite a few cannabis lab explosions. So, excuse me, so emergency responders rolling on a cannabis event um, face the same hazards in a cannabis response that you would generally face in a lot of the other clandestine laboratory responses that you've been on. If you happen to be responding to an event at a licensed facility, hopefully that event will not happen because they're doing the right thing to begin with. But again, you should be there with an instrument that is capable of detecting all of the major categories of atmospheric hazard that you might potentially encounter. LEL, O2, CO2, CO, and a photoionization detector. And watch out for the presence of individual toxic gases. For instance, if in the greenhouse they use sulfur pots, so you burn sulfur, produce SO2 to fumigate the plants. Well, then maybe in that case, you also want an SO2 sensor or a separate SO2 instrument. Be alert to conditions that trigger the need to do some kind of additional monitoring. So the most common cannabis gas detection applications, we've discussed production on the grower side, process on the extraction side. You know, the butane hash oil or the resin or the initial cut of the material may or may not be the actual product that is finally sold. So there may be additional manufacturing process and procedures that go into the final product. For instance, cannabis vapes. Um, you're mixing the cannabis THC products into tocopherol or vitamin E oil or something else that goes into the vaping device. So manufacturing can be a pretty involved process. It's not just baking a batch of Alice B. Toklas hash brownies. There is some real sophistication going on in a lot of the larger recreational and, of course, even more so with medical marijuana facilities. Besides the facilities issues that relate to cannabis products, you have all the other facilities issues. If you've got a warehouse with a bunch of propane-powered forklifts rolling through it, you may have carbon monoxide or nitrogen dioxide, all of the normal issues that you would have in any industrial facility. Those of you who don't work in said facilities may not understand how large and sophisticated the operations are becoming as the industry matures. You also have all sorts of industrial hygiene issues. We'll be talking about terpene exposure and where to set the alarms for workers systems that you install in the greenhouse in a little bit. You also have community issues such as fence line monitoring systems to document that you're not releasing nuisance odors to the neighborhood, or sometimes the fence line systems are adversarially put up by the community. But where you position the monitors and where you set the alarms, we'll be talking about that. Hopefully, if you have a grow operation, you are doing what needs to be done to scrub the atmosphere and keep those odors retained within the greenhouse, not creeping around the corner into the community. Many of the applications or requirements are regulatory in nature. You're just under an obligation to explicitly conform to state or provincial or county or municipal rules. And the rules are often very, very explicit in requiring what needs to be done with regards to continuous fixed detection monitoring for the dominant hazards. And of course, if you're on the emergency response side, then you're dealing with explosions, with solvent spills, with releases, all of the normal things that you would be responding to with a clandestine lab or with any other kind of laboratory or facility where they're handling solvents and explosive gases. And then, of course, you know, in every sense of the term, the cannabis industry is a growth industry. There's a lot of expansion, new construction, you have confined spaces, you have all of the other hazards that you have with any rapidly expanding business. So any of these can drive the need for gas detection. One of the issues is do make sure that you have as clear an idea as possible of the legality in your jurisdiction of various cannabis related activities. On a federal level in the United States, use and possession of cannabis is still officially illegal all across the country under federal law. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 is still in force. It lists cannabis as a Schedule I drug, which prohibits even medical use. But laws at a state and local level increasingly are at variance with federal law. Medical use is now legal in 36 states. And the Rohrabacher-Farr Amendment of 2014 prohibits federal prosecution of individuals in compliance with state medical cannabis laws. So that really allows companies to seriously go after this business in the full light of day, come out of the corners and pay some taxes. The recreational use of cannabis is legal in 16 states. Another 14 states have partly or completely decriminalized its use. 12 additional states allow access to cannabidiol, CBD products that are very low in THC. The legality is often murky, and there is a creeping de facto legalization process that is going on in many areas. For instance, consider Texas. Officially, it is illegal to cultivate or use cannabis throughout Texas, but if you look at some specific communities like Austin, you find that they have just unilaterally decided that they are not going to prosecute anyone for possession of less than 4 ounces. So on a de facto level, I guess it's been legalized, or at least decriminalized would be the more appropriate term. Also, all across Texas, CBD, cannabidiol, is legal if it has under 0.3% THC, on a statewide basis. And more in a couple of slides on the difference between CBD and THC. It's a pretty minor structural difference in the molecules. But before we get to that, let's talk about what you have in the uh, plant proper while it's still growing at the time of harvest, and the THC, which is the psychoactive component that actually gets you high. What's in the plant to begin with is THCA, that's tetrahydrocannabinolic acid, easy for me to say. And this is what you find in fresh, undried cannabis. THCA is the non-psychoactive precursor. Actually, if you're a believer in the benefits of cannabis, about now they will instruct you to say that, oh, no, 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 the THCA is most certainly an active component, and it has all of these benefits. That's true, but one of the benefits that it does not have is getting you high. That would be THC. THCA is converted into THC by a chemical process called decarboxylation. If you look at the THC molecule, you'll see this chemical group over here. It's a COOH chemical group. And what we do is by heating it up, or by another chemical procedure, if you prefer, we remove that chemical group. So the only difference between THCA and THD is the removal of this little group. But that makes all the difference in the world. The size and shape of the THCA molecule is just not perfect for fitting into the receptor in your brain that makes you crave potato chips and enjoy the high. Once you remove that molecule, now it fits into just like the key in a well lubricated lock, like the Twinkie in a tightly fitting wrapper. It actually gets right in and it does the job, and it's psychoactively involved in getting you high. The difference between CBD and THC. THC is the psychoactive component. CBD is the second most prevalent of the active ingredients in marijuana. Again, it's active, it's just not psychoactive in a way that gets you high. It is the dominant out of over 85 terpenes and cannabinoids that are present in hemp and cannabis plants. Both the hemp plant and the cannabis plant produce CBD, but the hemp plant does not produce THCA or directly produce THC. That would be the difference. So is CBD legal? Well, the state of legality for CBD is in flux. The federal government still considers CBD in the same class as marijuana. The position of the states on this issue depend in large part on whether or not the CBD comes from hemp or from marijuana. That really raises some concerns. So here is the CBD molecule, legal in many to most places for sale and manufacture. Here is the THC molecule, which is a different story. You'll notice that the difference between these two molecules is simply that here the oxygen is linked up to form this aromatic ring, and here it is not. Now, the next question is, can I convert CBD into THC? Well, yeah, you can. And you don't have to be Heisenberg from Breaking Bad to do it either. A little bit of glacial acetic acid, some kitchen sink chemistry, and bingo, you're off to the races. And it's that situation that really worries regulators who don't want to permit more generalized recreational use of THC. It's the old, how do you keep them down on the farm once they've seen Paris? It's just very easy to get from the legal substance to the not yet legal substance. Now, the legality of CBD is expected to change. There is currently bipartisan, believe it or not, in the United States Congress, there is bipartisan consensus in Congress to make hemp a legal crop. So I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this in the future. So where do the industry regulations come from? Well, in the United States, they sure as heck don't come from the federal government, except to say no. Cannabis enterprises are highly regulated, but they're regulated at the state level, the county level, the fire authority level, the city and the community level. Atmospheric hazards are absolutely acknowledged to exist, and the regulations are explicit in identifying what they are and what you need to do. So what I've done here, throughout this presentation, I've drawn heavily on California and Colorado regulations and statutes because they were there the firstest with the mostest. The two states were among the first to legalize recreational cannabis, and they developed some pretty strict guidelines to keep the production activities as safe as possible. So this particular set of requirements comes from California, from Orange County, the home of the Magic Kingdom, Disneyland. So here, they spell out for you that if you have a CO2 enrichment system, then you are going to have to monitor the greenhouse for the presence of carbon dioxide. You have to position the sensors in a place where they will detect the gas as it begins to accumulate. You can't just measure the oxygen concentration because carbon dioxide is technically a toxic gas, and it takes way more than a toxic level of CO2 to displace enough oxygen for an oxygen monitor to go into alarm. So the types of cannabis enterprises, you have non-commercial, commercial, medical marijuana. Medical marijuana is larger scale, tends to have integrated growth and extraction, often very well funded, well managed, and increasingly a big business. And then you have a whole other cluster of businesses involved in the manufacture of CBD products. For licensed, the extraction rooms we've talked about. Here, I've got my rhythm back. So for the grower hazards, let's talk about why you would add CO2 to the atmosphere to begin with. CO2 is necessary for plant growth, for photosynthesis. You're going to be optimizing growth and production of THC by increasing the light, but not too much, giving the plants a rest period between light periods to recover, and temperature, humidity, carefully managed, and carbon dioxide is used to accelerate growth. The optimal CO2 concentration for growth is between 1,200 and 1,500 parts per million. The grow areas are tightly sealed, which means if you have a leak or too much carbon dioxide that is introduced into the greenhouse atmosphere, it's not going away. It's going to be there to cause harm to somebody potentially. At most licensed enterprises, CO2 is introduced via compressed CO2 gas cylinders, which are controlled by solenoids and valves, and actually may be equipped with very sophisticated control systems that are directly integrated into your monitoring system. So as the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere drops to a certain point, you have a little jolt of CO2 that is introduced to the atmosphere to bring the concentration back up to within the goalposts where you want it to be. Another method, which is not legal in some jurisdictions, it is legal in others. It's cheaper, so where it's possible to use, a lot of operations use it, is to use a generator for CO2. You make the CO2 by burning alcohol or natural gas. So if that's the way you're making the CO2, you might want to, besides the CO2 monitoring system, you might also want to consider including a couple of carbon monoxide sensors in the system. Now at non-commercial sites, there is a whole array of less and less sophisticated means of enriching the atmosphere with CO2. Strategies include open flame burners, so you're not even making a nod towards generating CO2 without generating CO. You're just burning the alcohol openly. You have fermentation, so hey, it's a good way to get carbon dioxide, some sugar, some yeast, some water. Bingo, you've got CO2. Dry ice is another strategy. Just throw a whole bunch of dry ice down in the basement. There you go. Vinegar and baking soda, or even composting. So just bring that pile of rotting vegetation in from the field, throw it in the basement, and there you go. But hopefully at a licensed facility, you do have the required monitoring equipment, you do manage the safety hazards, and you take the issues of CO2 exposure seriously. So you want to release the CO2 near the ceiling, CO2 being heavier than air. It does tend to settle and collect near the floor or accumulate in low spots. You want to keep that from happening because it can't fertilize the plants properly if it is in localized pockets that are outside of that 1200 to 1500 concentration range where you want it. So you have good ventilation throughout the greenhouse to make sure you have mixing. So you're using fans to disperse and bring the gas to the plants. Here is that slide that I was reaching for a couple of minutes ago. So here is the rest of the story on how to situate that carbon dioxide monitoring system in Orange County. Activate the low-level alarm at 5,000. That's the OSHA or NIOSH or TLV exposure limit. There's agreement on that. It's a TWA technically, but most of the time people set the alarm as is specified in the Orange County Fire Authority regulations. You specify setting the instantaneous alarm right at 5,000 parts per million. You have a high alarm at 30,000 parts per million. If you hit the low level alarm, you want the gas, the CO2 to be cut off, you want the ventilation system to be engaged, and you want alarms to sound. If you have a high level alarm, all of the basic alarms, plus you better get people out of there, because at 30,000 parts per million, you're at the IDLH concentration for CO2. So now it's starting to get real serious real quick. Carbon dioxide is present as a natural component in fresh air. It depends on the time of year, whether you're in a rural area or an urban area, but the concentration is, give or take, around 400 parts per million. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless. It's heavier than air. It's 1.5 times the weight, the density of fresh air. And as I mentioned, when it's released into an enclosed space, it tends to settle to the bottom. And because it settles, it tends to reach higher and higher concentrations in areas where it can pocket, or in areas where you don't have good ventilation to mix it around. What are the symptoms? At low concentrations: headaches, dizziness, shortness of breath, nausea, rapid irregular pulse, depression of the central nervous system. Even moderate exposure can be serious. So most people don't feel any effects at all symptomatically until the concentration starts to creep above 1,000 parts per million. But once you get into that 1,000 to 2,000 ppm range, now you start getting all of the classic tight building syndrome type of symptoms, with drowsiness, clumsiness, inability to focus properly, and actually it kind of mimics some of the symptoms that you would have if you were consuming the products that you're manufacturing. The optimal concentration in the greenhouse being between 12 and 1,500 parts per million. Well, you're right in the range where the workers are very likely to have some symptoms relative to exposure to the CO2. The permissible exposure limit, however, does allow everybody to be there perfectly legally, normally, for a whole 8-hour shift at an average concentration up to 5,000 ppm. So hopefully you're not going to suffer any long-term consequences any worse than a little bit of drowsiness when you were in the greenhouse proper. IDLH is 30,000 parts per million. An unprotected worker should never, even for a moment, be uh, exposed to 30,000 parts per million or more. That is a concentration high enough that officially it is likely to cause irreversible physiological harm if the exposure continues for 30 minutes. So it's very, very bad for you. By the way, you might not know this, but slaughterhouses sometimes use carbon dioxide to put animals to death. Believe it or not, at commercial hog farms, they will frequently use carbon dioxide delivery systems to put the animals to sleep. It beats being terminated in a more violent way, but you certainly don't want to be terminated in any way if you happen to be working in an area where you have the potential presence of a lethal concentration of carbon dioxide. Now, the reason that we don't put the emphasis on oxygen monitoring is because carbon dioxide is a toxic gas with a permissible exposure limit of 5,000. But also, if you just start adding carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, so the blue line shows you that I'm adding and adding and adding, and the red line shows the concentration of oxygen in the greenhouse. As the CO2 increases, the oxygen decreases, but it actually takes about 67,000 parts per million of CO2 to displace enough oxygen for the oxygen alarm to go off at 19.5%. So that's over twice the IDLH concentration. So this is why we measure the carbon dioxide on a direct basis. You've got a fixed system and you have to maintain the fixed system. So what are the periodic calibration and inspection requirements? Typically, they're going to be inspected quarterly or biannually. Typically, they're calibrated or tested by exposure to gas at least biannually. Now, the bouquet, the odor of marijuana, which is famously nose detectable by people, especially people in nearby communities who don't like cannabis. Boy, can they ever smell it at a low concentration. But both the extracted products and the odors associated with the cannabis crop come from terpenes. These are the aromatic compounds that give plants and extracts their distinctive flavors and aromas. So this includes everything from myrcene, pinene, and limonene, the dominant terpenes that together comprise the aroma of cannabis plants, but it also includes other common terpenes like um, the peppermint oil, the spices that you have in your cabinet at home are based on essential oils, all of which fall into this same category. So greenhouses are often equipped with scrubber systems to keep that nuisance odor from escaping. But the terpenes themselves can actually be toxic. Now, the most common of the terpenes is generally myrcene. And then it's followed by limonene, and at the tail end you have pinene, and then you have about 85 other terpenes that are also present in the air. For most of the terpenes, uh, workplace or health exposure limits remain to be determined, but there are a couple of exceptions. One of the notable exceptions is pinene. So pinene is the same molecule that's present in pine bark, in pine resin, and actually it is the major component in turpentine. 65% of turpentine comes from pinene. So there is a permissible exposure limit for pinene as turpentine of 100 parts per million. That is an 8-hour TWA limit. If you follow the TLV, the exposure limit is 20 parts per million, quite a bit lower than the OSHA limit. And the IDLH concentration is 800 parts per million. So you never know. Well, actually, if you're a grower and you have a strain that you love and market for its specific ratios of terpenes, then you know exactly what's in there. But as a general principle, we're not sure what terpenes might be in the atmosphere. Some of the terpenes in the atmosphere will certainly be pinene, some will be myrcene, some will be um, limonene, but we don't know the exact ratio. So what we do is we assume that everything that we're detecting with the PID we use to measure terpenes in the air, we just assume it's coming from the worst actor here, the pinene, and we set the alarms accordingly. Now, when you have a 1-part exposure limit definition, like an 8-hour TWA, the exposure limit doesn't give you a lot of guidance on where to set the alarms. So when all you have is a TWA to work with, usually hygienists will use a 3 times and 5 times rule to establish the peak instantaneous alarm concentrations. So you'd set the low alarm at 300 parts per million, that's 3 times the TWA, the high alarm at 5 times the TWA, and of course, the IDLH, 800 parts per million, that would be your third alarm. And you would feed the information from your PID transmitter directly into the controller used to operate the other transmitters in the area being used to measure other hazards. So we have, in the case of a greenhouse where you care about the terpenes, If you're concerned about workplace exposure, on the inside of the greenhouse, you have one transmitter. By the way, you have three basic components that go into a fixed gas detection system. You have the sensor, you have the associated local electronics, and then you have the controller, which is someplace else where you're collecting that information and making decisions. It can be a computer, it can be a dedicated controller, it can be a PLC, but the sensor is located in the area where you are exposed to the analyte, to the stuff you need to measure, and the associated electronics is usually right there in the same place. The controller can be anywhere that you like. You can even take it by means of an Ethernet cable or a wireless link on a worldwide basis if you wanted to. But anyway, that's what's going on the inside of the greenhouse. On the outside of the greenhouse, uh, terpenes are nose detectable at extremely low concentrations, certainly down in the range of 1 part per million. So what we would do on the downside of your scrubber system is figure out what is the lower detection limit where you're going to get a stable reading and you're not going to get a lot of false alarms, and that's where we're going to set the alarm, because we don't want any of the odor getting into the neighborhood if we can avoid it. So we'll set the alarm at maybe 1 part per million or 2 parts per million. So we've already talked about extraction rooms. So talking about extraction in a little bit more detail, you can certainly sell cannabis in the form of leaf or buds, but by far the most valuable products are the essential oils and extracts. Extraction is the process of separating the active chemicals from the raw material and turning it into a usable form. Medical extracts are usually based on cannabidiol, while the recreational extracts are based on THC. Again, the easiest, most common, and cheapest approach is to use a flammable gas like butane and propane, or solvents like ethanol and methanol to separate the chemicals. The more elegant approach is to use supercritical CO2, but it's also a little bit more expensive. Again, the extraction rooms are hazardous locations where you need to have the installation of a system for direct continuous measurement of explosive gases and vapor. And it's going to be reasonably easy if you talk to the local fire department. If you're wondering, that's probably where you're going to have the information the most easily accessible. They will lay it right out for you. They will tell you what you need. They may even give you some guidance of systems that they have success with in the past. Anyway, the extraction room proper is Class 1 Div 1. The adjacent rooms are Class 1 Div 2. And remember, if you have carbon dioxide, you in the extraction room, you're going to need to measure CO2 on a direct and continuous basis also. Butane is not the preferred approach, but it can certainly, well, it's preferred by many, but it is not as elegant or as efficient as supercritical CO2 extraction, but that doesn't stop it being used in an abundant level out there. But there are some restrictions in licensed facilities. At the very least, you can't vent the butane to the atmosphere. Sadly, with hobbyists and folks that are making it for their own consumption, they'll often use a non-conforming system or procedure which vents the butane directly into the atmosphere, and boy, is that a recipe for disaster. What is supercritical CO2 extraction? If you're already using it, I hesitate to teach fish to swim, but for those who are wondering what it is, it's not like the mother-in-law of carbon dioxide. Supercritical CO2 is you are pressurizing and heating the CO2 under conditions where it begins to behave not as either a gas or a liquid, but it behaves as both a gas and a liquid. The critical point is reached at about 1071 psi and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can modulate the conditions to facilitate extracting different fractions of material from the cannabis. And also what is really nice is this technique is very gentle on the molecule, on the molecules, the active molecules. What you don't want is to hit the molecules so hard that you damage them and reduce their psychoactivity and their desirable characteristics. So the supercritical CO2 extraction doesn't stress your product molecules out to the same extent as some of the other techniques. And this is a stage by stage process as well. After you have the first stage of extraction using the supercritical CO2, now you often or usually put it through the second stage, which is referred to as winterizing. Winterizing takes longer, is less efficient, produces lower yields, but is even easier yet on the fragile molecules being extracted, and it produces even higher quality and more selective and higher priced extracts. And here, what we're using most of the time is ethanol or methanol. Some of the time we use other solvents like benzene, hexane, even salad oil. And whether you're using butane, whether you're using solvent, whether it's the first stage or the second stage of extraction. In the extraction room, if you are using solvents and combustible gases, you need to have that LEL monitoring system. For butane or propane, you can use your choice, either catalytic CC LEL transmitters or IR LEL. For alcohol measurement, the preference would be to use IR LEL transmitters because alcohols are a little hard on the active beads in standard catalytic sensors. For ppm solvent measurement, you use PID. For CO2, you use infrared sensors. Guys, don't be afraid of fixed systems. It's really easy. It's easier yet if you get a questionnaire from the manufacturer you are working with, which will have a simple list, a modest number of questions that you need to answer. Once the manufacturer has the answers to the questions, it's pretty easy to come up with an optimal solution. We've already talked about the importance of emergency responders and inspectors and investigators having an instrument. Remember, a 4-gas instrument does not cut it. You need a little bit more. You, at the very least, need CO2, hopefully PID as well. So instead of a 4-gas instrument, you're relying on a 5-gas or 6-gas instrument. And remember, for solvent vapors, all of them, every one of them is toxic long before it reaches even 5% LEL. So you exceed the toxic exposure limits long before you exceed the explosive limits for the gas. And remember, when you're dealing with a clandestine lab, if you're dealing with a high-end medical marijuana facility, you might as well be in a laboratory owned by Big Pharma. The equipment is first class. The people are stellar. The level of competence is magnificent. And then when you get down to the hobbyist levels for stuff that's being whipped up in a kitchen sink in the basement, it's another story. And here, their knowledge comes from marvelous technical chemistry authors like Jack B. Nimble and Uncle Fester, and it's the and the outcome is that, of course, we have cannabis lab explosions. So don't be caught up in that cannabis lab explosion. Make sure you understand, you use, you have, you maintain, you calibrate that instrument in the way that it needs to be. And remember, there have been a lot of new developments in instruments over the last few years. You have new products, new sensors, wireless communication. Your distributor can take you through the options. Try not, at least early on in the process of talking to your distributor or considering product options, try not to get too focused on price until you figure out the cost of ownership needs and your needs, what you actually must have, what would be nice to have, what would be okay to have. And again, for a lot of the hazards, there's no options. If you're a grower and you're enriching with carbon dioxide, bang, you've got a requirement. If you're an extractor, you have an extraction room where you're using butane, bang, you've got that requirement. Your distributors, your friends at SMG, at Safeopedia, we're all here to help you. If you have some additional questions, I don't have time to answer every question in real time right now, but please send them along. You have the email link. We will try to get them all answered as quickly as we can. And I thank you very much, guys. It has been a pleasure speaking with you this afternoon.
Hey Bob, that was great. Very informative. A lot of little cheeky jokes in there we all loved. We have some questions coming in right now. So if you do have questions, make sure you get them into us right now on the console. As Bob said, if we don't get to them now, I will send them all to Bob and he'll reach out to you as he sees fit. So we'll take a couple right now. Is it correct that the TWA in a grow house is 5,000 parts per million?
Yes, for carbon dioxide, every local requirement that I have seen ties the low instantaneous alarm to 5,000 ppm. So technically, you can be in 5,000 ppm for a full 8 hours, and OSHA is fine with that. You have not exceeded the TWA limit. But the fire department regulations want you to set the instantaneous alarm no higher than 5,000 ppm, and usually the high alarm is set at 30,000 ppm. That also is an instantaneous alarm.
Excellent. That's really good to know. Um, how is waste or byproduct handled? What are the consensus for detection during handling of cannabis waste?
Well, from my standpoint, the issue is what's getting into the air, does it matter, and how do you measure it? And what is of what's in my wheelhouse would be measuring the terpenes, which do have consequences if they are present in really high concentrations in the atmosphere. What you do with the actual plant waste, gee whiz, I think I'm sure somebody out there is marketing it as a super compost material. It's what I would do if I had truckloads of the stuff. Once it's done smelling like cannabis, it's got to have great potential therapeutic uses in your garden. Um, those of you who are in the business, I've just given you a great idea if somebody hasn't beaten me to it. But back to seriousness, if the plant material is in an area where it is still producing terpenes getting into the air, then you really don't want that workers being exposed continuously to concentrations above on an 8-hour average above 100, and on an instantaneous average, on an instantaneous basis above 300.
That's fantastic and really, really great ideas there. So we'll take one more question, then we'll wrap it up because I know people got to take off here. So in the cannabis industry, how do you know when you need a fixed solution or a portable solution?
Well, the primary places where you're really under an obligation for a fixed system would be for CO2 measurement, where you're either enriching the greenhouse atmosphere or you're using supercritical CO2 in an extraction room. There's no ifs, ands, or buts over that. Just like there are no ifs, ands, or buts with regards to LEL monitoring in the extraction room or adjacent rooms. So those are the places where the obligation is really, really firm. Now, if you realize that you've got problems, workers are complaining, you see that you're running with terpene concentrations in the greenhouse, say you've got terpene concentrations of 1,000 or 1,500 parts per million, so you're definitely over whatever exposure limits you want to shake a stick at. Well, probably you should consider installing a PID in that area, and equipping your workers in the appropriate PPE. I used to live in Seattle, worked for a company where what I did had to do with instruments, but what the company did also included PPE, protective equipment. And we had a lot of customers at that time in the Christmas tree business. And this same pinene that we were talking about just now is produced by all of those little Christmas trees. And you know what? The Christmas tree sap, the resin, the pinene, it was really hard on workers and on the PPE being used by workers. Um, Workers in the pulp and paper industry, where they are working in or near silos full of wood bark. There is a lot of literature on the health effects of exposure to the terpenes coming out of the chips. They're not good for you. It's not like you really are having a lot of health benefits by marinating yourself in pinene. So the answer would be optimize your ventilation to achieve whatever it is that you need to achieve with the carbon dioxide. Use scrubbers to remove unwanted terpenes from the atmosphere, hold the concentration down below the threshold. And in that case, you probably would want to install a photoionization detector and tie that into the system. And on the outside of the greenhouse, you have the PID transmitter with a lower alarm setting as well. That would be a situation where you wouldn't find that as an explicit requirement in any of the codes, but you're a commercial enterprise, you have to follow the law, and you have the general duty concept. You can't do things in a way that is unsafe for your workers. So you got to do what it takes to keep your workers safe.
Yep, absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. You got to do whatever it takes to keep them safe. So before we wrap it up today, Bob, I just want to give you an opportunity to give any parting advice to our audience today.
Well, as they used to say in the military, and this being 420 and all, smoke them if you got them, guys. And thank you very much for the opportunity to discuss these issues. I did introduce a little bit of levity here and there, but these issues are serious as a heart attack, which is pretty much the symptom that you wind up with if you have an acute exposure to carbon dioxide. So take the issues very seriously. Don't be in tomorrow's headlines when a cannabis lab blows up somewhere, either as the owner of or the responder to the event. So stay safe, and thank you very much, guys.
Bob's exactly right, guys. All jokes aside, it is a serious issue, so we got to stay on top of that. So on behalf of Staplepedia, I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. Huge shout out to GFG for being here with us today. Thank you so much, Bob, for imparting your wisdom on us once again. And as always, enjoy your 420, but take care and stay safe. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.